Cool. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm David Shwatrz. I'm the CEO at PIA. Really excited to have Mike with us today on the topic around agentic AI, specifically in automating the service desk. So, a couple household chores just to kind of kick this thing off. This will be very conversational. It's meant to flow, be very natural. So no slides that anybody has to look at or anything like that. And towards the end of this, there will be about 10 minutes or so for Q&A. So if you have any questions, we'd love for our audience to just drop those questions in the Q&A or chat section of this, and we'll make sure that we answer those as we get to the end of this. But a little bit about myself and PIA. So for anyone who doesn't know, PIA is an AI and automation company, specifically supporting the MSP community as a whole and driving automation across the PSA. So if you think about all the tool sprawl that's going on in the MSP world today, how can we drive more automation and efficiency, leveraging the latest technology that exists today? Like I said, I'm David Shwatrz. I'm the CEO. A bit about my background: I co-founded and ran a IT services business that was sort of a blend of SaaS and IT services. And that company was acquired, and we went on to basically acquire and do an M&A roll-up of a bunch of MSPs throughout the US at a company called Dataprise. And so I had a lot of firsthand experience at looking at service desk challenges at different size businesses in the MSP world. So perfect conversation as we look at where sort of technology is evolving today. And I have with me today Mike Stute, who's with Cloud Comms Group and is the CISO and AI Researcher. And Mike, I'll throw it over to you to just let you do a little bit of an intro on yourself and your background.
All right, thank you, David. Yeah, I started a cybersecurity company in 2000. We created, using machine learning at the time, so very early, we created the first behavioral intrusion detection system, which was, all about leveraging that ML to learn and do detection. And then, that's sold a couple times. That is actually part of Comcast now, Comcast Business. And since then, I've just been doing a lot of research on AI. I'm an AI consultant, and helping people leverage AI and especially implement AI. I think we're going to get into some of that today.
Interesting. Your brain must be exploding regularly right now with the amount of research that you're doing. I think it's, yeah. So, and it's funny, you mentioned building ML models, and I did a lot of the same stuff many years ago, and it's so interesting to see where technology has evolved to, and how challenging it was to do some very basic things, or things that today we consider so basic, but back then they were, best in class, bleeding edge technology. So it's really interesting to see where some of this has gone. So sort of like to frame the discussion today, I thought it would be helpful if we sort of look at defining like what does agentic AI even mean in today's world. And so a few themes that I thought would be helpful to just sort of set the context would be, how do you get value quickly out of these tools? There's so many tools and so much, I'll just say, noise in terms of what's out there and what's available to us. How do you actually find value quickly? How do you design it to be both internal focused and solving internal challenges, but also give your customers still a good experience? If the customer experience suffers, it's obviously not in anybody's best interest. I think there's a huge, huge topic around the human and psychological side of this whole thing. And then where does someone even start going down this path with agentic AI, right? Which is, I think, the challenge that so many businesses are facing is, I know I need to do something, or I want to do something. I don't even know where to start, which I think kind of is like a good spot to sort of like kick things off on. Specifically, like, let's just define what is agentic AI in the IT services space. So what do you think that really means when we talk about that, Mike? In the context of IT services and service desk, or really just the IT landscape as a whole?
Yeah, I think so. I think, people are a little confused about AI in general. Of course, the largest two pieces that we have right now are LLMs and chatbots that certainly are useful. And a lot of people have even failed at implementing those companies. And I think when you get to agentic AI, I think we're talking about more, I think about the workflow management or kind of the data flow underneath things. So you're talking a lot about service desks and things like that. And certainly back in my company, we had a SOC, so our security operations center, and we had a lot of that. We had a lot of, it was very basic at the time, and there was no tools, so we had to write everything. And I just remember, an incident happening, and then that creates a ticket flow, and there's a lot of customer interaction between with that, and document exchange and information exchange, and that consumed a lot of time just moving that data. So when I think of agentic AI today, I think about the smaller pieces that can do all of that for you. So where we had to manually create a ticket based off an incident and then fill in all the forms and create all this information to create the workflow and manage it. I think Agentic can do that for you. So I can imagine that, back in those days, it would have been, the incident would have been created, the ticket would have been sitting there, it would have automatically handled the conversation between my clients and actually my SOC team. And that would have all been geared and gathered together into one place that I would have all my data. So that's how I think of agentic AI. And I think one good way to think about it is it's does small pieces of a workflow, but it does a lot of them. So it could be one of those a huge time saver. So if you have a task that it takes somebody 5 minutes, but they do it 20 times a day. That's obviously a big time saver. But now imagine if you have 100 or a couple hundred employees doing that. There's a huge time saver in that. So that's definitely how I define agentic AI.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And where do you think, how do you personally differentiate looking at like an RPA tool or other automation tools versus agentic AI? Because there's clearly a lot of overlap and the areas get a little confusing, I guess I would say, but I would love to hear from you, like, how do you differentiate those?
Yeah. You're what you're referring to is basically some sort of workflow automation without AI versus one with, correct?
Correct. That's exactly right.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think if you go back to standard without AI, it's what I term brittle. I mean, it's very easy for it to break very quickly as soon as one little piece of data is incorrect. And I mean, a great example that I have actually two that should make it pretty clear. Uh, One, I was working on a sort of commission system where a lot of commissions flow in, and they needed to then attribute this to the proper accountant and the proper salesman and so forth. And what happened was, as all the different vendors are billing, they have different names for the company. So maybe one is, ABC Workplace, and one is just ABCW, and one is AB Workplace, and all these different names for the same company. With a standard, you would have to have all those various names to be able to group that to the same company. And then as soon as somebody else provided something new that you didn't think about before, ABC Corporation or something, you'd have an outlier and you'd have to deal with it in code. But of course, with an AI, it can group all those together and know that's all the same company. So that's what I mean by brittle. Before that would break and you'd have some various pieces of data that were hanging out there. And now with the LLM, behind it and saying, okay, I can categorize text and group things together very quickly. You can avoid that. I think another really good example is I ran into actually a study recently that somebody was doing, and they found about 700, I think 750 different ways to say I want to pay my bill. I'm pretty sure everybody's interested in a customer that says I want to pay my bill, right? So, instead of saying I want to pay my bill, they might say, hey, I have an account with you, I need to take care of, or, I believe I owe you some money or something like that. And so once again, you could have 750 different ways or some natural language processing without AI to try to piece that all together. But with AI, it's very easy to figure that out. And so to me, those are two great examples. It can make decisions for you, obviously based on you gather data maybe in your workflow, and then the AI can help you make a decision. So before, branching was called always an if then else. I remember these great big, huge ladders of if this then that, else this then that, else then that. And it just went on and went on forever to make a decision. But with an AI, you can gather some data and say, in a way, it's kind of like saying categorize this and which way do we want to go? What part of the workflow are we going? Those are three great ways that I see that AI can really, really make a workflow much easier and less brittle.
Yeah, that's a really good shout out. I think it made me laugh because yesterday I had to call my credit card company and it was automated, call prompt. And I remember I kept repeating over and over, representative, representative, because none of the prompts support me in my request. And it very much reminds me of exactly what you're talking about, which is how brittle these tools are when they're not built leveraging AI, and they're sort of, I'll say, tools from the past a little bit, and that company just hasn't quite caught up yet. So I think that totally makes sense. And I think the level that your tools need to really be agentic, to have some reasoning capabilities in it, is key to this whole thing being truly successful and not being so vulnerable to breaking, like you just said.
Yeah, and when you mention that, the other thing, when you're actually dealing with customers or clients directly, I mean, sentiment analysis, right? Being able to, I can imagine you're trying to get a representative, and you get to that frustrated part where you're just like, look, I just need to talk to somebody. That's one of those important pieces too that can say, at this point, I need to take a different route because the sentiment of this particular person is on the frustrated side or the angry side versus, so that's a huge one as well when you're actually dealing with humans on the other side. It's a big one.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation a couple weeks ago with a partner of ours, and we're talking through specifically sentiment analysis, actually, and how often, I mean, I think everybody on this call that's on the MSP side of the house can relate to this, how often somebody submits a ticket that the urgent and what's right. Oh, did I
Yeah.
lose you, Mike?
Yeah.
Oh, there you
There,
are.
we're
All
good.
right. Sorry, I thought I lost you for a second. How do you determine yeah, how do you determine what's actually urgent when every ticket somebody submits as urgent? So, Mike, I'm going to switch my network, so give me 1 second.
All right, we'll do. I'll hang in here. Yeah, a lot of that sentiment analysis, I think the key part to that is, and I kind of got where you were going with the distortion there. It is the urgency and the tone of voice. In fact, I've seen some great tools that are actually able
Yeah.
to do this, real time. And so they can listen to a voice and tell you how that person is feeling as they're speaking. So you're talking about sense of urgency. That's what I got kind of before you switched over, and that is a lot of it as well. There's a whole science behind that, and also knowing what to say to keep a customer that is upset or and needing that sense of urgency, how to handle that better. And although we don't attribute a lot of emotions to AI, they are very good at detecting it in humans.
Yeah. That and you picked up exactly where my internet started cutting out, and I was dropping off. But that's exactly right. I think there's something, being able to differentiate those types of things and read tonality and understand what truly has urgency and doesn't is a key part of where this reasoning element plays such a big role as we go forward.
Yeah, exactly, and that applies today too. A good example of that is if you've got somebody that's dealing with in the transport, and we have a transport client, and they might have, say, a driver that's out on the road that says, "Hey, I can barely see. There's no visibility on the road." Uh, you know, they're not saying I'm in a snowstorm, but you can definitely tell that's what's happening. And that would mean that particular one needs to move up in the queue. That's something you need to deal with now. So whether that be data or a human, you get that urgency is key. And that's a great point, David. That's something I hadn't really thought about, but that is, just even queuing who gets service next in the service queue is very important. I think we might have lost David again.
Sorry, Mike. I'm back.
No
It's
problem. No
a
problem.
rough day. I'll have to give Spectrum a nice call after this. Um, but yeah, I think that's right. So let me transition this a little bit, because we're on the topic of the human element of this whole thing. How do you think about the human in the loop part of this process, right? Or these systems, where does it make sense? Where does it not make sense? I think, if we think about the human part of this, there's a lot of actual and valid anxiety that companies have with really implementing AI solutions. So really understanding, like, where does it make sense to keep the human in the loop? Where does it not? Would love to hear that from you.
Yeah, exactly. I think the hardest thing that people go about when we're talking about implementing AI in a company, I mean, I'm pretty sure a lot of people have already read about the MIT study that said 95% of AI implementations have failed. And there's a couple of reasons for that. But one of what you're talking about right now, human in the loop, is one of them. I think the first thing is some people don't actually build a sort of what I consider like an AI fabric, a playing field for the AI or a layer inside of the IT infrastructure for the company for AI. So they might approach it like, I'm going to do just one little project. And so they get some agentic work to maybe, read this database and handle some records as they come in. Maybe it's a client service based thing, or it could be, any piece of data that comes in. And they automate it and they do it like standard programming. I'm going to go ahead and debug that. We're going to go through it and we get a 99% hit rate. We're going to go live with it. And they don't put the human in the loop. And that doesn't mean that you have to have a human sitting there punching the button to say, okay, go. For certain decisions, that's probably a really good one. I mean, if you think about, nobody's doing this yet, but if you were going to have a AI make some decision based on buying, and you actually would probably want to look at it and go, okay, I'm going to prove that before it happens. That's a great example. But people tend to think that's when they need the human in the loop. And I would say when you first start, you need a lot of logging and a lot of information for a human in the loop to be able to take that situation, because it's going to be a matter of trust. You've built your workflow, you've got your AI making decisions for you. You want to make sure those decisions are correct when you move to your production environment. So to me, you need a human in the loop quite a bit at the beginning. And then as you get more confidence in its ability, you need it less. And then maybe it turns into just, I'm checking 1 in 10. And then later it just turns into a report that you could look over, or have an AI help you look over and say, what's the anomalies and do I need to take an action? So I think it's kind of one of those, crawl, walk, run situations that you need to do.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the purchasing side of things, buying, is a really relatable topic specifically to this, where maybe there's a threshold where you're okay with an AI agent actually handling the procurement of something, but over a certain point, there need to be safety mechanisms in place and guardrails in place that bring that human back into the loop to validate, okay, this looks right. Like an example would be procuring, Microsoft licenses. Maybe it's okay for an AI agent to procure 1 or 5, but what we don't want is the ability for it to autonomously go and select to purchase 100 or 1,000.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So there's definitely a crawl, walk, run element to it that I see as well. What do you think about the sort of transparency side of this to the human that traditionally would be in the loop, that is maybe shifting to being a little bit less dependent on being part of that workflow or process?
Yeah. Yeah, that is a tough one. I think part of, and this was part of the MIT study too, part of the reason that AI fails sometimes, AI implementation, is because there is this feeling that this might replace me, right? I mean, maybe we're all sitting around thinking, hey, I might be replaced, but the reality is, certainly in an MSP situation, any service situation, it really is more about getting more time for the agent, because I go back to, I think about those SOC days when we spent, we could spend 15, 20 minutes working on a ticket and then call the customer back. If that could have all been done in a minute, my agent would have been back with the customer so much sooner. So to me, knowing that it's under there and that it's working and you're then the human in the loop, I think it becomes a different part of the job. You are basically letting it do a lot of the grunt work, so to speak. And then it's your job to just simply look at it and say, did I get it right? And then I can re-engage whatever I'm supposed to do. If that's, get back to the customer or modify the ticket or reroute. I think that's the key to this. And so because of that, I think people should be less fearful, because really it's going to let the same number of people do more work, as opposed to getting rid of people to do that work. We're still going to need it. It's going to be there. The human is going to be there for a long time. So I think that's really the goal here, is to set it up in such a way that the agent does its work and the humans do theirs. And there's going to be a lot of, like you said, there's going to be a lot of just simply checks at some point where I go, okay, but you're going to need that human body still in front of it. And I don't think we're to the point where anybody as a customer would want to deal strictly with an AI. I've seen some fairly sophisticated AIs, but still, at the end of the day, especially when you're having a problem, having that human that can just say, "Hey, I got all the data right here. I'm ready to help you." And I think that's the key to this. I think people that try to say, "Well, I won't need the humans. I can replace them." We've had several of those that have already not worked out right. I
Sure.
won't mention any company names, but I think we all know of a couple that it just hasn't worked. And so that is still what we need. We're still there, and humans in the loop are going to be important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We've found here at PIA that also transparency is a big part of this. So in order to keep the level of comfort to calm anxieties that technicians could often have when they don't actually get to see the work being done, but they're told it's been completed, it's important to share that transparency. So a lot of, what we've done in terms of being a purpose-built product is showing a lot of logs, way more data than I think is often needed. But it's more so because we want to make sure that there's a high level of comfort, because comfort drives adoption drives more success, improvements to that business, and so on. So there's a whole sort of domino effect that comes from something like that, um, where a human in the loop is valuable, absolutely, where it needs to be, for super repetitive, mundane tasks like a password reset over and over, which is probably often not what a technician got excited about getting into the industry for. Um, Showing the logs and transparency and notes and all that is key to the level of comfort that they need to go, okay, I feel like Pia is handling this just fine. Let me move on to the more complex things that need my time and attention.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that brings up another point is, and I can remember, we had 2 or 3 different levels of technicians, and I think for a lot of MSPs, that's the same way, right? You have the bottom lines that can do 90% of the work, and then you start escalating up. And I do remember one thing that happened that we learned was, the level 1 guys were the frontline guys, and when it got escalated, say to level 2 and then to level 3, originally we had them kind of out of the loop, and this is just a human loop. But because they're good agents and because they care about what they do, and they've been working with a customer for maybe 45 minutes or so before it gets escalated, they always wanted to know, hey, how did that work out? And so having that AI also do that too. So if it's doing part of that workflow, and let's say the level 3 guy closes the ticket, he needs that backflow to come back to that level 1 guy to say, hey, ticket number 43 was closed. Great job, everyone. Good. And I think people forget that's something the humans do. They get together and they say, hey, team, great job. And if an AI is moving the data, it's still a good idea to do that, to let them know that, hey, you did your part, and we're all happy. So I think that's the part of that maybe isn't a human in the loop. That's like feedback to the human.
Yeah, that's a great point. How do you think, from your experience, leaders can help address some of the uncertainty in their teams? As like you mentioned, the MIT study, 95% of these initiatives fail. I think there's a bunch of different reasons for that personally. I think
Yeah.
one of them is, which you alluded to a little bit earlier, is just simply the adoption challenges that come with this, or the fear and anxieties of job replacement, right? Some things like that. But how do you see leaders playing a role in addressing that in their organizations?
Yeah, it's very important that you establish very early that this is really, as much as we'd love the technology to be able to be a virtual employee, and we've all heard that term, right? We get the ad where you can have a virtual employee. At this point, certainly from my experience, that doesn't really exist yet. I mean, we don't have a virtual employee. I've heard somebody say, well, I started a company and me and my 5 virtual employees, but I don't find that to actually be the case. Okay, when I see it, right? Um, So the leadership is very important to establish what it is you're trying to do. And that really is remove all those repetitive tasks that somebody has to do. I think you mentioned, like you said, somebody doesn't start, say, at a help desk because I want to reset passwords all day. So if you can alleviate that and say that is taken care of for you in an intelligent way, and we're still taking care of our customers, that frees you up to do more of the important work. So I think one thing you need to address is uh, the training is going to actually be more important. And that's something leaders have to do. If you free your agents of doing all the small work, your employees that are working down there in the trenches, if you start narrowing the trench for them and let an AI do a lot of that work, you get to actually get more time on your hands of that employee and they can advance their knowledge. And I think that's what leaders need to do. First of all, you need to set up a program to say, I am going to have a lot more time. If I've got 50 agents, I can now use those 50 to do, twice as much work as we were before, and that work is going to be advanced. And so having that up front as part of your implementation to say, how is it this is actually going to help you advance your career and your knowledge is an important piece of that.
Sure. Yeah. Do you think that we're seeing any real world examples where the technology has outpaced human comfort levels?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of cases. So a good AI with a lot of tools available to it that has been tested very well can do a lot of data moving work. I always just can think of this as like data flow. It'd be like, looking this record up over here, knowing it has to be routed over here, and then checking, well, that's past, say QC check, and now it needs to be moved over to here. And because of that, it can advance things so quickly that a lot of, say, in the past, maybe that was somebody's job. I went over and I did that same thing. I grabbed the next record off the database, and it took me 15 minutes to do this. I got to stage 2. I did another 5 minutes of work, and then 10 minutes later, I got back to here. So when you reduce that to somebody, that they're suddenly just dealing with that middle chunk. I spend 5 minutes on this because all the work has been done. There's a certain unsettling feeling they get, like, wow, I used to do all that, and now I'm not. So am I really productive anymore, or is somebody going to notice? Right? They're gonna be thinking that way, um, and so that does make it difficult. And I have seen a couple of examples. A good one is, as we were talking about, any sort of routing system where you have to make a lot of decisions to route either a physical object inside of a factory or a piece of data through, say, a very large data flow. They can do that very efficiently and very quickly because they have so many more points of data available to them. And an interesting thing when I was doing a lot of work in neuroscience as part of learning AI, kind of the bioinformatics piece where you're trying to simulate biology,
Hmm.
we learned that humans make decisions based really on 7 things. And so we have a lot of emotional support. We have this system built in where we get a bad feeling about something, right? And even though that might have been from experience and there were 100 data points to give us that bad feeling, we have it now. It's one of the 7 data points we use to make our decisions. AIs don't have that problem. They can use 1,000 data points or 50,000 data points to make a decision. And because of that, those decisions can be generally much better than we can make as humans. And I think that's where it has outpaced the human side of things. And it really is kind of an unsettling thing sometimes when it has made a decision, but you don't understand why it's made that decision. But it turns out that it was right. I've seen that happen, and that was even early with machine learning work, as you had to realize that we used to we had data and we put it in through something we called code to get answers, right? But now we don't do that. We took code and we applied rules to data to get answers. Now we're really putting more answers and data together to get the rules. And because of that, we don't always understand those rules. And that's probably the most unsettling piece, I think, David, that I bring it to.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're told to trust our guts, uh,
Yeah.
and these tools remove that element from it. And it made me think. I was doing some prompting this morning using ChatGPT and then Claude, like the same request, but testing the same prompt against 2 different systems. And uh, again, two different tools, but the way that Claude actually walked me through, here's why I'm doing this along the way in a very complex prompt. It was not a simple one by any means. And gave me so much more assurance and calmed my nerves so much more than how ChatGPT in that particular example handled that exact same request. And I've seen it flip-flop both ways. It depends on what the prompt is for sure. But it was interesting. It made me much more in that moment for that particular scenario, drawn towards one much more than the other, because it calmed the anxiety I was having of you can't just jump from like the beginning to the end. I kind of need to be walked through how you got there and still do the work for me, but at least give me a level of comfort that it's okay. Like I'm going to be okay on this journey. And,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
that's an interesting way that you put it, which is like these, human elements and traits that we have. And when you remove that ability to trust your gut, or I don't know why I'm feeling this way, but there's uncertainty. What does that mean? And the tool's not telling you what's going on. It makes it complex for sure.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a surprising thing that companies I think have purposely made a lot of the chatbot syncophantic, right? We're going to be on your side all the time, even when it shouldn't be, and that may be a problem or not. But I do love a lot of the reasoning engines because it's exactly what you're saying. You put it in a prompt and you get this brilliant answer back, and you're like, wow, gosh, could I have done that? And at least with a reasoning engine, you can pop it open and you can kind of see the process. So I think that's exactly right. Spot on what you're saying I may not be able to understand how you made your decision, but at least if you can give me some process that you went through, I'll feel better about it. But I tell you what though, I think the more people use this, I mean, after a while you just don't care anymore, right? You're just like, okay, it's right. I don't have to worry about that. The danger to that is it could still be wrong. So we're back to that human in the loop, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly right. So switching gears a little bit, just going back to, repetitive tasks, service desk type of stuff. So I was having a conversation yesterday with the CEO of a large MSP, and he was telling me, we've gotten PIA to do 56% of our tickets, fully handled, right? And that was not just across service desk, it was actually across all their service pillars, NOC, SOC, service desk, etc. And it got me kind of thinking a lot about, I mean, that's a big number and it's fantastic. And we've seen those results with other partners, but really curious to see like right now how you look at agentic AI handling repetitive tasks and where does that tipping point really happen where it starts fully reshaping workflows and roles that exist today within an organization.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, first of all, congratulations on it. That's a pretty stellar number, I think, to hit
Yeah,
across the company. You said 56%?
56, and it's a large MSP. We're talking about
Yeah,
several thousand tickets a week.
yeah, that's pretty impressive. Yeah, I think when you talk about that tipping point, and this is where it goes to how you implement your AI. I go back to that idea of like an AI fabric or an AI foundation. Um, first of all, we all talk about data. You gotta have good data and you gotta have good data sources. Now, one thing that I think companies have done is they think they have to have really structured data for an AI to understand. And I have found that to be the opposite. You definitely need clean data, but I don't think it has to be so structured. Structured data was kind of a programming thing. I need to have standardized rows with standardized values and ranges and things like that. And I think with an AI, you have to have less structure. So it's really more about focusing on cleaning your data. And then the second part of that is, this is technology. It has limitations. If you give it too much data to make a decision, that's where you start getting to those strange hallucinations that you run into, things like that. So it's really a matter of getting that. And that's what I mean by getting that foundation and fabric. And then what I find is companies that do this well is they do that one little automation project, let's say, um, and it works out well. And because they have the proper fabric in place, adding the next one or inserting into that chain to make it more complicated is very easy to do. And so to me, that tipping point is when you've got your data, you've got it clean, and you've got the right amount of data for the LLM, so you've kind of fine-tuned that piece. And then you actually have an easy way to add automation tools. And I know, One thing I'm talking about is somebody like Pia that has a lot of the workbook already done and a lot of the things already in place. You may choose two or three of those that make sense, and then when you get a comfort level of those, you go from there. And that tipping point to me is it's going to be dependent on the customer and exactly what they're doing, but there will be a point where they say, this is great, and I've gotten back 20% of my time back. What else can we do? And there's this feeling that it's working well for them, and how what's the greater leverage that we can get out of this, and then use that leverage to have it do more. And I don't have a formula for that. I have just seen, I've seen it, and surprisingly, it's much faster than you think. It really is. When you have somebody that knows what they're doing and does a great job on the agents, that tipping point comes very quickly. It might be just simply 2 or 3 implementations. And then since you have a process, you're doing it right. You've got the human in the loop. You know that mistakes are going to happen, but you've got a way to catch them. Then it goes really fast.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, we at PIA, it was very strategically built to have the entry point be the service desk specifically, but to that point, out of the box, a lot of these very repetitive tasks and workflows already built out so that partners, as they sign on with PIA, could get value as quickly as possible. And so, 30 days in to signing up, they could actually get real world wins, small base hits. Think about it. Side note, go Dodgers if you're watching the World Series, but small base hits along the way. Yeah. And from there, evolve it from there. But one of the things that we found that's really important to that is how do you, in order to kind of reach that tipping point, there you sort of have to have a mindset shift. And that mindset shift comes from KPIs or scorecards or some way where there's a regular visiting of the data to go, okay, this has worked for us, this has not worked for us, but also what's next? What gets us the next big lift here? And so I would love to hear like your take on that.
No, I think it goes back to your question about transparency too. And I think the mistake that some people do on the implementation is, we already said it, right? There is no dashboard. So it's this piece of what we used to call code sitting in the background, moving data, and you don't get to see it. So having a dashboard and having those analytics is very important for any sort of implementation for this. So whatever service company you're going with, or whether you're building them yourself, you do need to have that dashboard. And then I think that dashboard lets you help set your milestones. Okay, so you mentioned 56%. I mean, that's a great number. I'm wondering if that was originally, we're hoping to do 10% of our tickets in one area, and then maybe 10% company wide as we roll that out to, across geographic regions and so forth. So having those goals in place, I think, you first of all, when you roll this out, you're not going to roll it out company wide. You're probably going to pick a division or something like that. And so you should have a win there and clarity to define what that win is. And then now you say, well, now that I've in that division, maybe it's a global division, I want to do that on the West Coast. I want to do it, say, Northwest or something. And then we can spin up from there. So now maybe you've got a global invitation. You've met that goal. Now your next goal is, I've got the next thing on the task list. Here's the next workflow that I want to actually automate and put an agent on. And then you do that all over. So once again, I don't think there's anything set in stone on how you do that. But I do think having those milestones and those goals. And to me, that's why you said percentage. I like it being a percentage, because that is, it flattens the field. Maybe you have 20 really important tickets a day that you say, I don't even want an agent on, right? I'm not going to touch those. Those are those high severity 1 tickets I want the humans on. But maybe I want 10% of my level 2 tickets taken care of, and 60% of my level 3, those password resets and things like that, and that could be your goal. And then those numbers should obviously start shifting up, and pretty soon you're saying, I'm ready to handle level 2. So that way, eventually, when you get to those 20%, say, severity tickets, you're saying, I want to do 10% of those. You're only talking about 2. And so that's the best way to do it. I do like looking at it as kind of a percentage of the bulk.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have found that with our partners, so there's a lot of like best practices, benchmark numbers to strive towards from a performance perspective. But in the MSP landscape as a whole, how one MSP defines one thing, the exact same thing versus the next MSP and so on, there's always nuances within it. So we've really wanted to put a lot of emphasis around advocating and benchmarking against yourself, right? So it's not about the peers, other organizations in the space, but how are you performing month over month or quarter over quarter based off the impact goals that you had set for your organization? So I think what you said makes total sense, right? Let's look at it at level 1, level 2, level 3, and so on into other areas of the business and go, how can we incrementally increase these metrics for our business? It's not about other businesses. It's just how do we benchmark against our own performance?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think that's the way, and I think it's important, as you said, it really at this point, it shouldn't be a comparison to what other people are saying. You don't know their workflows. They may have very simple workflows that were like a 5-step, and they're saying, hey, we've already hit 87%. Well, it was an easy workflow to do. So I think that's an important point. It is, I'm curious, one thing that, I know you have an MSSP background. Have you found that there are certain of your customers that like have a vertical silo that we're not going to do it here because that's our, that's a privacy based, or we have to have compliance there or something like that? Are you running into any of those issues?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The short answer is yes. It varies for sure. Compliance and security is a huge piece of I would say the obstacles that MSPs run up against. They will have specific customers that they work with that are going to need to be FedRAMP compliant or need to have other types of compliance things in place. So a lot of our energy and focus has gone into that. We have quite a bit of resourcing allocated specifically actually to that. Because the reality is it's a lot of work to get those things in place, but it gives a high level of comfort. And when you don't have that capability, what we find is it creates a situation where an MSP will use this for part of their business, but not all of their business. And the problem there is that they don't actually get the full benefit of what they could be getting. So we've put a lot of energy and focus into making sure that we can basically meet all the compliance regulations that they have in various different areas. So but yeah, I won't downplay the lift. I mean, you're a CISO, so you know firsthand it's quite a bit of work to do all that. And it's not a role I envy sometimes for the folks on my team that have to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think part of that is when you're talking about, building your AI foundation, part of it is you have to realize you may get to that. We may actually want to do some of our the secret sauce or something. And so, you don't want to send that out to public models, at least not in a way that makes sense. So I think that infrastructure piece is very important for people that are doing, because you might go out to multiple service vendors. If you can't tie all that back together, if you're living in 3 different clouds, let's say, then that's not going to work very well for you. So that's what I mean, and that's why, from the compliance side, and exactly as a CISO, I can tell you that you work really, really hard to be SOC 2 compliant or 27001. You don't want to give that up simply because you're leaking data. And so it's an important part of it.
Yeah. I completely agree. Do you big question. Do you trust AI for security or critical operations work?
Yeah, we do, and there's certain parts of it that obviously you don't want to touch yet, but there is still a lot of data. And in fact, as far as pattern recognition, I mean, that's what this is all about. That's what it's always
Sure.
been about. You can still really rely, and a lot of these the more modern AIs are even better at seeing things that you simply can't. So uh, once again, it might come down to private models. It might be something that you need to run in house or in your own cloud so that you don't have to worry about the data you're putting in there. Doing a lot of security, and if you're dealing with your client's data, if an MSSP, that's something you can't just toss out to the cloud, to some inference cloud outside and hope for the best. So that might be where you have to say, we have to do something private. We have to be hosting the things ourselves. But that doesn't mean you still can't leverage as part of your fabric those other models. So I think it's just careful planning. But one of those keys up front when you are thinking about that in your implementation is you are probably going to need both. You will probably need a lot of public infrastructure, but you're also going to need private infrastructure as well. So
Yeah.
you don't have to build it right away, but at least keep that as part of it. Because I'm afraid if you don't, then later you're going to go, wow, if we could just automate this, but we can't because that's our private data and we don't want it out there. And then it becomes a major block, and you may have to really start over with your infrastructure and rebuild everything from almost scratch, and that's always hard.
Yeah, that makes sense. Where do you, how do I want to ask this? How do you think about generalist AI tools versus industry specific tools in that context?
Yeah, I where we are right now is, we all generally think of the big model, the Geminis, the Chat GPTs, and the Claudes, Perplexity, all those, and those are very large models that are designed to contain a lot of data. So, you think about what Google wanted to do with Gemini is for a long time, you did a Google search and then over on the right-hand side, it said, by the way, here's your AI answer. And now, right, the Gemini answer is at the top and below it is your search. They want it to have all the data in the world and know about everything. For agentic AI, I think that's actually a problem. Too much knowledge lets it make too many bad decisions. So smaller models, I think, are the way to go. And we could get into the technicalities, but you can take a small model and put your data into it through a process called fine tuning, which makes it even smarter and it keeps it more on focus on what you want it to do. So I really do see the large models that we're all using will have their purpose, and that purpose is to be your dictionary, your encyclopedia, all of that. But I do think small models that are much smaller and actually capable and running on much smaller GPUs will be the way we go. And so I can imagine a company having, maybe 15, 16 different models. Maybe you have a model for your sales team and a model for your production team and a model for your engineering team. And even within those teams, they might have different models as well. And those models all talking together on that fabric. And working together to be able to accomplish tasks. So it's kind of a multi-agent idea, I think, the way we will go. So part of your infrastructure is, what do you need? I've seen AI companies that are actually installing and embedding a small model, like some version of one of the Llama models, inside your own infrastructure to do your agentic work. That way, you have complete control of it. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is token cost. If you start doing agentic work, you can consume millions of tokens very, very quickly, just as you work through your workflow. So that's another part of that you have to think about as well. How well does it scale?
Yeah, I we have found something quite similar, that those small language models, there's a very specific need for those. The LLMs sure can do that, but there's almost too much data and too much reasoning that can go on that maybe is not advantageous for most MSPs out there. And systems need some sort of guardrails in place, is what we've been seeing. And so if it's structured to be more industry specific as opposed to generalist tools, there's a couple things that happen. One, it's much more trained around that exact scenario that they're going to come up against. But the other thing is we like products like PIA and others understand the MSP landscape, the need for multi-tenancy, co-managed, hybrid, semi-hybrid, on-prem, cloud, like all these different scenarios that start coming up, especially with all these various different tools. And I think I would imagine from your experience, having built a SOC and run a SOC, you know firsthand that a lot of those same things apply in that kind of space as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that's a spot on comment for sure. It is about that specialist knowledge. So when you do go with a smaller model, a small language model, you have a lot more flexibility on what you want it to do, and you can focus it exactly on its vertical that it's taken care of.
Yeah, makes sense. So
Yeah.
we're at the 10-minute mark with only 10 minutes left. I want to ask one last question before we open this up to Q&A. And we could spend 2 hours on this next question. So I'd love to just get your quick thoughts on it. But where do you see agentic AI going next? And what do you think MSP and IT leaders need to be preparing for now based off what you foresee agentic AI doing next?
Yeah, I think the first thing that's going to happen is there's going to be a certain amount of market consolidation in the agentic work because it's all over the place, and some are good, some are bad. So I think that's going to be one one key. Pick your players carefully, at this point, because you want them with you in the future. And then the other part is, I think it's going to be, as we were talking here in the end, I think we'll start seeing more specialist sort of models coming out that will be specifically created for agentic work. They'll be smaller, they'll be faster, and they'll be a lot easier to train and to get your own data into. And so that's the way I think that it'll go. I think that'll be a trend that we'll see quickly. The other trend is whatever you pick now, you probably won't be using in 2 years anyway. So a lot of it is having that foundation and that fabric so that you can be nimble with it and be able to adopt new technology that come out, because it's moving fast and it will even move faster.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I would agree with all that. I also think to the point earlier on it being industry specific as well as having a land and expand element. So pick your tools that can grow with you. If you outpace the capabilities of that tool, you kind of face a situation as an MSP of needing to maybe replace it sooner than you realize. So a tool that can actually grow and expand across your organization adds a lot of value if it's possible. So I think that's a consideration that leaders should definitely have as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So, all right. So a couple questions from the audience. AI is changing the game for MSPs. What's one area where you think MSPs are most vulnerable if they do not adapt?
Yeah, David, I think that you're probably more qualified to answer that than me. So I'm going to toss that one over to you.
All right. So one area,
It's your business, right?
totally. That makes sense. I have a cybersecurity one next, it looks like, so it'll be a perfect throwback to you.
All right.
So one area that we think MSPs are probably most vulnerable is, I think, waiting too long to do anything at all as it relates to AI and automation right now. So it was a very different conversation maybe 12 months ago or even 18 months ago, where it was a bit of more of the early adopters. And now we're seeing that there's just such a trend happening right now. And when you think about the landscape of the MSP space, specifically in the service desk, you have two things horribly at odds. You have your customers who are expecting really fast response times, perfect every time, and everything perfectly documented, and that the experience is universal regardless of which engineer or technician I work with. On the MSP side, those things are clearly at odds because it's hard to do it fast and perfect and consistently, regardless of technician, every time, and document it all. So those things are very much at odds. Then you layer in inflation, employee turnover, institutional knowledge that leaves with turnover. It's complex. So I think we're in this really unique spot that MSPs can't wait too long to do something. They need to do something sooner than later because they need a plan to keep evolving their business.
Yeah, understood.
So I think that's definitely a vulnerability that they're faced with.
And that's almost universal. I would say that's probably universal. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so on the cybersecurity side, and another question that came in is threats are evolving fast. How can MSPs leverage AI defensively without creating new risks?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because anytime you start tinkering with the security workflow, you may be exposing yourself. And right now, I'm going to say that one industry that adopted AI reasonably quickly, at least from the machine learning side, was cybersecurity. There's a lot of already very mature tools out there that were not AI in the past that we're now calling AI. Okay, so that's going to be one where you need some good trusted advisor consulting from somebody that knows the vendors. I mean, that's going to be the key in this. It's very difficult to round up all the vendors and listen to them about their products because they all have their vertical. They're really good at what they do, but they only know what they do. And so having somebody that knows multiple vendors and has a lot of experience in the industry is your best bet on how to do that. Because there's a lot of excellent vendors and they all have strengths and weaknesses. So knowing those is how you pick the right one to not expose yourself. And I know security has kind of gone that route where all the vendors are trying to do everything. That's a bad idea, right? You got to really pick what you need and get the right vendors working together.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's sort of a theme I'm seeing with two other questions I'll ask, but one is team members are worried about, this is my translating of various list of questions I'm seeing come in. But team members are worried about tools like PIA replacing roles. I think this is probably a universal question across all kind of agentic AI. How should we approach that conversation to ease concerns? And I know we talked a little bit about that earlier in this conversation, but would love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, no, that's a big concern. And it is scary for somebody doing that. So it's what we talked about earlier exactly. You need to be able to have a training route for your employees. They're going to say, really, the story should be you're going to have a lot more time on your hands, and so therefore, your utilization for what you do and your specialty is going to be much more available to me as an employer. And so we need to develop and adopt that. It's not that you're going to be replaced. It's that you're going to be alleviated for doing a lot of the grunt or the level stuff, the mechanics of your job, as opposed to the thinking part of your job. And so as an employer, you need to set that up properly to say, this is really going to alleviate and take a lot of the grunt work off of what you're doing. And then you can deal on exactly what you need, and you can be more of the problem. So it's going to be a higher level thinking, and that can lead to more training. So that is how I would approach it. And as an employee, you also have to realize things are going to change. They're going to change very quickly, and you can't be resistant to learning new things. I mean, in fact, you should be happy to, because that's what's going to allow you to advance your own career as well.
Yeah. Wow, I should have probably left it to you to wrap this thing up because that was a perfect ending to it. So, like, we're about out of time, so I appreciate it. Any last words before we kind of wrap this thing up? I think this was a super informational conversation. I think we probably could have done many hours on this, but any last words?
Yeah, no. First of all, yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. It's been great. I think that the key and the last words are there is a certain amount of fear involved in this. And then the second part is everybody knows they can use it, they just don't know how. And that's what you got to get over. You really do need to get the right people in front of you to help you do that. Um, but but don't be afraid of it. It really is, when you get some good agentic working for you, it will be surprising, first of all, how you'll become dependent on it, and then how quickly you get a lot of the time back to do the stuff that you're good at. So, there's a certain amount of that resistive side, and there's a certain amount of how do I do it. That's the difficult part. Okay, so, but there's a lot of services, there's a lot of people that can help you with that. It is a matter of, just like you said, David, too, you can't wait too long.
Right. Yeah, makes total sense. That's a great takeaway. I appreciate your time, Mike. One last thing I'll say as a final takeaway is two things. One, to that point, I think AI requires definitely a bit of a mindset shift. It's a transformative opportunity for a business. It's not necessarily just bringing it into a business how you've run it before, but sometimes it requires a transformational mindset shift to get it to drive the results that will benefit your business. The other part is I think that AI is really a collaborative force. It's not a replacement, it's a collaborative force. How can we level up the folks that we have on our teams today to get to do the things that really, really excite them and get them eager every day when they wake up and start working? So, Mike, I appreciate your time. This was a great, great time. Enjoy doing it. Hopefully we can do it again, and we'll talk soon. Thank you,
All
everyone.
right, thank you, David. Take care.